I am Lydia Serrano, class of 99, and I'm a member of the 1stGenYale Executive Committee. Welcome to our program, Open to the Yale Community. Do you feel like there's more to life than what you're currently doing? Do you feel like you haven't reached your fullest potential? Do you feel like you want to make changes in your life, but aren't sure where to start? If you answered yes to any of these questions, this fireside chat is for you. I want to thank our co-sponsors, the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, Yale Women, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences Alumni Association, and YAA Careers Life in Yale. We are thrilled that over 250 Yalees are joining us tonight. You represent 68% from Yale College, 30% GNP, and 2% Yale faculty and staff, postdocs, and other employees. 94% of the alumni here tonight range in the years from 1972 to recent grads. And the recent grads, 15% graduated in the last 3 years. 4% of the students here tonight are split evenly between Yale College and the GMP schools. And we have 23 states and 13 countries being represented tonight, including 3 provinces of Canada, Chile, Germany, Hungary, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Italy, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, and Denmark. One more note, participants, we'd like to see your faces so that we can make this interactive. So please show video. Now to our program. Angela Choi, class of 2012, and Roni Beth Tower, GSAS PhD, class of 1980, will share their experiences of evolving in their career directions and defining success on their own terms. They will also discuss how to make career changes and take career breaks in order to tap into, align with, and live one's purpose. There will be time for Q&A, so feel free to bring any questions that you may have. Our speakers, Angela Choi, class of 2012. She is an international life purpose and career coach. She helps driven professionals who feel stuck and unfulfilled to discover their purpose so that they can have both the impact and income that they want. Her coaching stems from experiences and lessons learned over a decade of finding her purpose through corporate, startup, and nonprofit worlds across the US, Africa, Asia, and Europe, all while juggling self-judgment, familial pressure, and societal expectations. Sign up for her free guide, 6 Steps to Living Your Purpose at www.angelachoi.co/6 Steps to Purpose. Roni Beth Tower, PhD, class of 80, is an author and a retired research, clinical, and academic psychologist whose memoir, Miracle at Midlife, a transatlantic romance, won a 2017 IPPY Gold Medal Award. Her blog, Life Refracted, is at psychologytoday.com/blog/Life Refracted, and her writing about Paris can be found at bonjourparis.com/author/Roni Beth Tower. You can find photos and more on her website, miracleatmidlife.com. Let's begin with Angela.
Thanks so much for having us. Roni Beth and I are super excited to be here. And before we begin, we thought it'd be helpful to just ground you into the space. I know that we're coming from dinner. Some of us are just starting our days. Some of us are just wrapping up with work. So I love grounding people into the space. So we're just going to do a quick breathing exercise. If everyone's in a relaxed position, you're sitting straight, your spine is straight, your shoulders are down, and your hands can be resting in your lap, on your knees. And when you're in a comfortable position, you may close your eyes. And you're going to take a deep breath in And you're going to take a deep breath out. Again, take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. You're breathing yourself into this space. There are so many things that you could have been doing right now, but you chose to be here. Thank yourself for showing up today. Thank yourself for making time for yourself to learn and reflect. Join this conversation with an open heart and an open mind. Take what you need and you can leave the rest. May this fireside chat provide you with the inspiration, new ways of thinking, and hope as you consider next steps in your life. Take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. Again, take a deep breath in and take a deep breath out. Whenever you're ready, you may open your eyes. How's everyone feeling tonight? You can give a thumbs up or sideways, or if you're not feeling so well, just to gauge the room. Awesome, lots of thumbs up. Super excited to be here tonight. I'm going to kick off the conversation just by briefly explaining my own career trajectory and the motivation behind the decision for my first career choice. And then I'll pass it on to Roni Beth, and she'll share about her motivations behind her career choices and life choices. So for some of you, you may know a little bit about my background. I graduated from Yale in 2012. And after graduation, I started my career in the consulting world before moving on to a healthcare startup, before moving on to the nonprofit world, before engaging in entrepreneurial endeavors as a life purpose and career coach. And in between these full-time jobs, I took time off to go on sabbaticals, to explore different options and to see the world and to try new things. But I want to take it back to my first job outside of college, where I decided to go into consulting. When I was a student at Yale, there was a lot of familial pressure for me to make good money because I went to a good school. And at that time, when I was a student at Yale, consulting was one of, I would say, like 5 to 6 options that people took after college. So it was law school, medical school, consulting finance, and TFA. And consulting was just a viable option for me. And coming from a low income Chinese immigrant family, again, there was this expectation that I would make a lot of money because I didn't grow up having a lot of it. And so that was what really informed my career choice. And I will also say that consulting firms did a really good job of convincing students that working in consulting is a continuation of your liberal arts degree because you get a breadth of experience through different consulting gigs. So I felt like I was on top of the world when I got the consulting job offer. And when I started my job, it didn't take very long for me to realize that this isn't it. Like, this can't be it. I worked so hard to get here. I felt like my soul and brain were rotting because I was doing the same things day in, day out. And that was really challenging, especially coming from a place like Yale where intellectual curiosity was always encouraged. And so when I realized that this wasn't working for me, I was thinking about, what do I do next? What is it that I want next for my career? And at that point in my life, there were only 3 things that really mattered to me. So I knew that I wanted to do more mission-driven work. I knew that I wanted to work for a smaller company. And I knew that I wanted to have more autonomy and ownership over the work that I was doing. And that was the 3 criteria that was front of mind for me when I decided to look for other jobs. And so when I made that switch, I ended up working for a healthcare startup where they provide remote behavioral therapy to patients. And that was way more aligned to what I had studied at Yale, which was psychology. Now, with that experience, I also want to pass it over to Roni Beth so that she can share her experiences about what motivated her to make her career and life choices.
Thank you, Angela, and welcome everybody. It's thrilling to be here. And it's the last pivot of 6 I'm going to talk about as I'm actually being here visible. My career was, go away, please. My career was inextricably entwined with my life. I grew up, I was born to a mother who was a high school dropout. My father was an engineer. They were divorced when I was 3 years old. And my childhood was full of illness and loss and chaos. And I got to adolescence and discovered learning and writing and the joy of being part of a team. I was so happy to be soon on my own. In college, I majored in religion because that was where you could ask big questions back then. Psychology was running rats through mazes when I went to Barnard. Yale didn't take women back in those days. And everything was going along just great until the summer of '63 when I was 19 years old, going into my senior year and homeless. Suddenly I was homeless. My mother had moved to California and there was no space for me. My father had remarried and my stepmother didn't want me. I gathered resources from every place I could find them. It amounted to $900 and I went to Europe for the summer, studied at the Sorbonne, and my life was changed initially. At the end of the summer, I stood in the middle of the city and I said, this is the most romantic place on earth. I don't want to come back till I can come back with a man I love. And that we will revisit later on. The following spring, I graduated from Barnard, and a few days later, I married my college boyfriend and went to Bloomingdale's on the executive training program, which seemed a good way to support us while he finished law school. Then we went into the Army, and my first child was born, my daughter, and my whole life changed when Jennifer was born. I loved being a mother, the privilege of sharing someone's life, of watching her grow, of being responsible, of being part of it. I didn't mind the sacrifices that were required. It was such a privilege. And that was all I wanted to do. I wanted to be a mother. I wanted to be a homemaker. And it was at a time when that was what women were doing, including all the women I was surrounded with in the milieu my husband had grown up in. So 2 years later, my second child was born and she died after 39 hours of a Hyalin membrane. 2 years after that, my son was born and he died 5.5 hours later. I realized I couldn't suffer one more loss unless I had work. And so the why I wanted to work was I needed to work. I needed something that was meaningful. I needed something that I felt could make a difference. I needed something that didn't have anything to do with the people I loved. I also had a problem with boredom. And there were only 3 things I'd never been bored by: interior design, travel, and psychology. But the problem with psychology was I hadn't majored in it. So I went to a local school in a graduate program in school psych, started taking courses at night, tutoring homebound kids in order to pay for it, and decided I was absolutely in love with the field. And 50 years later, I can still say it. I am in love with my field. And applied to graduate school, did not get in the first time, stuck with it, kept taking courses, and I got in the second time. I started my PhD program, and that was my first major pivot, was to pick a field and to go to school. I loved school, but my marriage didn't survive it. My marriage didn't make it through graduate school. So now, being motivated by personal things again, I wanted stability, I wanted a home, I wanted meaningful work. I had to decide, what did I do after my dissertation? After my internship and my postdoc, I was working in a psychiatric hospital. I wanted to teach. And I applied for teaching jobs. I got 13 interviews from Cambridge to Palo Alto. And I got 3 lovely offers. And would have had to drag my kids through a court case. I wasn't willing to do that. So I decided instead, okay, I'll stay. I won't move my kids. And I'll open a practice. And that was a huge, huge, huge risk, because that's entrepreneurial. That's going into a business with basically 2 years of experience behind my belt. Yale came and offered me a full year of teaching for someone who was on sabbatical. So I was able to teach, and I figured, give it a try, see how it goes, give yourself a chance. And it went very, very well. I like practicing. I like teaching. Things were great. I remarried. 10 months after I remarried, my husband had a heart attack on a family vacation and died at 38. And there I was, a single mom in this life that I just had to figure out what to do. And so I figured out what to do. I just kept working as hard as I could, doing as good work as I possibly could, and raising my kids and loving my kids. And it was home, and it was family, and it was stability, and it was doing good work. And that was what motivated me. It was very, very wonderful that I loved my field. I loved my work. I loved what I did. After Stuart died, I was in California about a year later giving a talk for an association, and took a couple of days to go hiking. And I was standing on top of a mountain, and all of a sudden it was absolutely clear what my life was about. My life was about loving. It was about learning it, living it, and teaching it. And if I'd always had it, I wouldn't have had to learn it. And it's easier to teach something that you had to learn. So I was profoundly grateful for that realization. And from that time on, my motivation was my mission statement. It was the person I wanted to become by doing the things that accorded with the mission. So that was my first one. My second pivot. My third pivot was several years later. In 1992, my son had graduated from college. My daughter was getting married and moving away for graduate school. My mother in California died, so I was no longer a long distance caretaker. I had an opening in freedom, and I was offered a postdoc in epidemiology and public health. It was an opportunity to learn quantitative skills and a different way of doing research that complemented my qualitative research and all the teaching I had done during the 80s. I taught at Yale during the 80s, just a course a semester, which was helped keep me in there. Loved that. And so things were going along great until I opened a newspaper and saw $279 round trip to Paris. And I said, woman, you are 52 years old. It is not going to happen. You made a promise to a 19-year-old, let it go, give it up, get on a plane, go back to Paris. And I did. That changed the rest of my life. That was the biggest pivot of all, because on that trip, that 4-night trip, which was all I could afford, I met David, who changed the rest of my life. Pivot number 5, the book that Lydia told you about tells our love story, but after the 2-year courtship, the book ends. It's a spoiler alert, but it ends with me moving over. And that meant I had to let go of everything I had built, all the independence, all of the networks, all of the structures, all of the everything in order to do that. But I couldn't risk not doing it. I couldn't let what was going on between us, I couldn't let that go by. So then we came back to the United States, which I had not expected to do, or I might not have gone. 9/11 happened. I wanted to work. A job at Columbia opened up, half-time core faculty teaching in the doctoral programs and the master's programs in clinical psych. And at 58 years old, I got hired to do that. I loved that job. It was so rewarding in so many ways. I mentored 9 dissertations, sat on 13 more committees, did a huge research project that complemented the research I'd been doing in epidemiology. So that was the 5th pivot. Then the 6th one was after I retired. I retired from Columbia when I hit the point where I couldn't communicate. My cultural references were too far from the students. I could communicate fine with the doctoral students, but because they had all been required, we didn't take PhD candidates until they had been in the world working, doing something. So all of you who want to change fields, that's what I worked with. I had a ballet dancer, a rabbi, a forest ranger, a TV producer. These people all were beginning their PhDs, and it's like they were fabulous. But the MA students straight out of college, just looking for a piece of paper, that was a different story. And I wasn't a good fit for it anymore. So I retired. I learned to quilt. I played with my 6 grandchildren at that point. David and I began traveling. We went back and forth to France. And I wrote up the love story. It's had its own trajectory. And it wanted to be published. I wrote two essays about that they're on the website. A book is born, and an author, it's a new, becoming an author at 72 or something like that for Writer's Digest. And now 4 years later, I've been writing for Psychology Today, I've been writing for Bonjour Paris, and I figured out, I think that it had to happen to make me a writer so I could be a teacher and a healer and a teacher and a healer and an inspiration, I hope, by listening and it being an example and writing. And so that's my story. That's the why, and that's the what, and that's a whole bunch of pivots. And Angela is an expert in how to make that transition, because the what and the why are the easy part. The how is a whole other thing. Angela.
Thank you. I wish I were an expert, but I think we're all just a work in progress, and it's like a muscle you flex, right? So the how, I think, is super important. And for me, I think the first step is listening to your heart and listening to your intuition. So going back to what I was sharing with you guys before, so I pivoted into the healthcare industry. I was working at the healthcare startup for a while. And about, I would say, like 2 years in, they started to become more corporate. And that was why I had left consulting. And so in my heart, I knew that I wanted to leave, but I didn't know what to do next. So I was very scared. I was scared of leaving because I was scared of giving up a full-time income. I was scared of not having an answer to the question, so what do you do? And I lived in New York City, and that's the first question that people ask when you're at a networking event or you're meeting someone. And I was scared not to have any leverage, like going into interviews going forward, if I wasn't fully employed going into interviews. But because I wasn't entirely sure what it is that I wanted to do next, I also didn't want to jump straight into a full-time job. I didn't feel like that was a good decision to make. So ultimately, I listened to my heart. And I think that's super important, because your heart will always tug at you until you listen to it. You may suppress the voice, but it's going to come back and it's going to tug at you. And my heart was tugging at me to leave my job, despite the fears that came with leaving. And I reached a point where my desire to leave outweighed my fear of staying, and I quit my job and had nothing lined up when I quit. But when I quit, the day that I left, I felt like 100 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders because it just felt like the right decision. I didn't know what I was doing next, but I felt free. And in the year after I left my job, the world literally opened up to me. In that year, I ended up pursuing a public policy fellowship in Indiana. I worked as a writer and photographer on a cruise ship that sailed around Southeast Asia and Oceania. I worked as an agribusiness consultant in Zimbabwe. I took my grandmother on a 3-week vacation across China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. I applied to business school and got in and decided not to go, which is a whole separate story. But I really wanted to take that year to just explore different options, to do things that I've always wanted to do, but didn't have the time to do because I had a 9-to-5 job. And my approach was that you figure out what you want to do by taking action and figuring out what it is that you don't want to do. And it was by doing those things that I could cross things off my list, say, okay, this aspect of this job works for me, but this doesn't, so that I can get more clarity around what it is that I want my job and my life to look like versus staying at a job that I knew was no longer serving me. And so how did I actually go about doing that? This is where I find that it's super important to leverage your previous experiences to experiences that you want to have, right? So, for example, with the public policy fellowship, I had zero background or experience with public policy, but I had worked on a gentrification and activism project in my community outside of work. And I was able to talk about that experience and bring that to my interview when I wanted to explore public policy, right? So I feel like it's really important to think about the skills and the experiences that you have and how they're transferable to other things that you're interested in. When I was applying for the position as the writer and photographer on the cruise ship, I had zero photography experience. I was not a writer by trade, but they wanted a portfolio. So I put together pieces and photographs of things that I've done in the past to present myself as a writer and photographer. And that experience was life-changing, to be able to travel to all those places and really understand some of the issues that impact the regions and areas in which we visited. The cruise ship was like, it had a nonprofit arm, so it was focused on a lot of like the social, political, environmental issues of the places we visited. So incredibly eye-opening. So I think it's super important to just be aware of like the skills, experiences that you have, and how can you leverage those going forward. And so what I really want people to understand is that it's never too late to start something new. I think that there is this perception sometimes that we need to be an expert in something, or we have to have a career trajectory and we have to have everything figured out, especially after you graduate from college, because you spent 4 years in college trying to figure out what you want to major in. But I think finding your purpose and what really speaks to you is a forever journey. And as such, at any time, if there's something that speaks to you, go for it, right? It's never too late to reinvent yourself. Like, I think it's so important to listen to your heart and do the things that make you happy. I know it sounds trite, but we really only have this one life to live. This is not a dress rehearsal. We get this one opportunity. And I really just want to encourage everyone to live authentically, to live courageously, to go after the things that you want. So those are my takeaway points. Roni Beth, I'd love to hear anything that you would like to add to that.
I think when Angela and I were talking about this, we were talking about, well, we're going to have a very diverse audience. So what do we want to talk about? What are the universals? Well, the universals are the what are you going to do? The why do you want to do it? And the how are you going to do it? And we come at it, those affect everybody when they're thinking about work choices and what is the role of work in life? What's it going to be? But there are the group differences, and the big one between us that we thought was intriguing was generation, because we grew up embedded in very different norms. We grew up in very different possibilities. Microcomputers came out when I was in graduate school, and the internet didn't come out. David and I communicated in 1996. Our long distance relationship was by fax. We did not even have email, let alone we certainly didn't have Zoom. I mean, today is extremely different. And there are tremendous differences in the culture, the work culture, because of that. Above all, I think expectations of how quickly what can happen and what has happened to impermanence. It is, for young people today, they expect work to be impermanent. What concerns me a little bit more, because my specific field is close relationships, is, are relationships going to be disposable too? Are they going to become disposable? What happens to intimacy? What happens to commitment? A Yale professor, Peggy Clark, she talks about our relationships. Are they instrumental or are they communal? In other words, are we doing business or are we doing family? There are different kinds of relationships. Are family relationships going to go by the boards because we're only going to be having instrumental relationships? So these are some of the issues that come up. But one of the questions I sort of saw fly by was sort of, how do you do it? And I think one of the takeaways is you start by asking, how much is enough? What do I really need? What are my wants and what are my needs? And they're not the same thing. Transportation is a need, and my Subaru Impreza is a perfectly lovely solution. I had a need to support my family. I had a need to raise my kids. I had a very strong need. I wanted to help them get an education. But there's a limit to what I felt I needed to provide. And there were so many things that I didn't feel I needed that made my life so much simpler, because I could focus on what I did need, which was meaning. You need to know what, given your own history, your own experiences, your own gifts, your own talents, you want from your life, and what you actually need from your life. And is there a way to meet the need by shuffling the wants around a little bit, just like my abstraction of a mission statement? Are there other ways? Now, by writing for Psychology Today, I get to do what I always did. I just don't get paid for it, or paid very much. I get $2.50 per thousand. But I hit over 1 million last November, 1 million views on the post. And if you're interested in Love 2017, every single Sunday I published another one on different ways of showing love. So it's a way of communicating. It's a way of doing what I was doing, just not being paid for it. And that's work, and it's meaningful. And just like housework and mothering, it should be paid. So those are some of my takeaways, and I'm going to turn it over to Lydia to give us questions, right?
Exactly.
Aren't we at the questions? We're at the question time. How do you do on timing? How do you do on timing? We do okay?
Are right on time. And we have several questions on deck. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. We're going to start with Payal, who has a question, please.
Hi, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Roni, for sharing your stories. Hi, Angela. It's nice to see you. So I just had a question, both to the speakers and as well as any participants. But when you were deciding your pivots in your career, what what resources did you tap into? Like, what tools did you potentially use? Versus, are there networks that you were part of, or communities or circles of friends that you kind of had to bounce ideas off of before you move forward?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So This goes back to what I mentioned before, the importance of listening to one's heart and one's intuition. So for me personally, a lot of this was an inner journey of just listening to what my heart wanted. I will say that there is a plethora of women's groups, career related groups out there. I, at that point in my life, didn't tap into those groups because I think for me, it was a very personal question of like, what is it that I wanted to do? And I think also probably this feeling of like, oh, what I'm doing is a little out of the norm. So I'm just going to focus on what feels right for me. Roni Beth, I'll let you take it.
No, I know when I turned down the teaching jobs, I had a lot of professors who couldn't believe I had done it. But Richard Hackman supported me. God bless him. Lise, you knew him, didn't you? He was my most important mentor, and I adored him. And he understood putting the people in my life first, because they've always come first. I don't really. I went by my heart too, Angela. It was, my life has been a series of learning to listen to what my intuition is saying, what my heart is saying. And it was when I stood on top of that mountain that I got it for the first time. And then ever since then, I've been practicing strengthening that muscle. And by the time it just became second nature by strengthening it. And I used all kinds of methods, journaling. There's a wonderful book I love, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's a 12-step program for recovering creativity. And a patient brought it to me, but she brought it to me. I figured I should read it if she's reading it. And I loved it. And I've done it 3 times now at different transition points in my life.
Thank you, Roni. We have another question. This one is from Jana.
Hi, thank you, Angela and Roni Beth. My question is about networks. I know it's really important now as you pivoting, especially if you're changing jobs, to have a network. And Roni, how did you build up your network when you went to Paris? And I asked because I moved from overseas and I still work for an overseas company remotely. And I want to change jobs, but I just don't have a network where I live. And I find it really hard to build that up also, especially with the pandemic. Thanks.
Oh gosh. Oh. I was not looking to build a network. David had some friends. They became my friends. When I got there, I went there with a contract with a writing agent to write while I was overseas. So I was going to become a writer back there. That's what I was going to do in Paris. And that didn't require a network. I had a contract. And so my friends, I made them through driving school because I thought I needed a driver's license. And then I signed into a full-time language program at Institut Catholique to learn language. And I made some friends through that. And then I made some friends through the expat community as well. And it was just through doing things that mattered to me that I wanted to do. I am not good at transactional relationships. I just am not good at it. And you need to know what you're good at, and you need to know what you're not so good at. And I'm not so good at that. I don't do that. I'm sorry, I can't help.
Thanks.
All right. We also have on deck a question from Donatien.
Hi. First, I want to say, Roni, thank you so much for sharing. I'm sorry for your loss, but you're really brave, and I appreciated very much you sharing all this with us. My question is, since you mentioned wants and needs, and just generational changes in the nature of work, how I'm having personally a lot of conversations with my friends who are in like late 20s, early 30s around career versus a job, and drawing meaning from your job versus drawing meaning from other things, and not beating yourself up for, you know, not having a career. So how do you balance this yearning for a job that you might be passionate about versus finding these passions outside and having a job that might be a bit less interesting but still fills these needs?
I was older when I went into psychology, so I had time to think about it. But during the pandemic, we're older, so we don't let people into the house. We're vaccinated now, but we really have really quarantined here. And all of a sudden, those early years of being a homemaker, cooking and cleaning have become sacred activities to me. They have become very, very sacred. It's all a matter of how you look at what matters. And supporting yourself is a very noble activity. You don't have to love your work. You just have to have a life that gives you what you need. My dissertation was on intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation. That's getting the world to give you what you need, like money from a job, and relationships. Well, it could be that what is intrinsically motivated is what gives meaning to your life. And that could be anything from play to spirituality to any creative expression. There are so many different ways to express internal motivation, intrinsically motivated behavior that doesn't have any reward except in the doing, and relational motivation. And but I never wanted fame and fortune. And in fact, David and I bonded our first dinner over the fact that both of us had walked away from it. I had walked away from what could have been a lucrative and a famous career. He had done the exact same thing because he loved France and he wanted to go back to France. And it brought out the best in him. And I can understand why. Culture is real. So does that answer your question at all? Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you.
I mean, it's not politically correct, but
No,
What
that's okay.
I see Angela was shaking her head. Do you have any comments to that question?
Yeah, I do have comments. I think that it's about thinking about what your priorities are and then recognizing that your priorities can be different at different points in your life, right? So there may be a point in your life where it's, you know, you want the financial stability and the security and to have your own place, and maybe that's at the forefront, right? So you have a secure job and then you spend your time outside of work pursuing your interests, and then maybe you get to a point where maybe you've saved up money and now you want to go explore, right? And maybe that's your priority, right? So like understanding that those things are constantly in flux and it's okay for things to change and it's okay for you to change. And then to also recognize that we all have different priorities. So something that may work for you may not work for someone else. So I think it's important to talk to people who you care about, who you love, who are maybe going through similar thought processes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think what's really important is to align with what truly matters to you at a given point in your life.
Hi, this is Annie Friedman, and I'd like to add on to what Angela and Ronnie are saying. I've had a fantastic career, but I've also come in and out of my career. I took a year sabbatical in my early 50s. I'm 67 now, and I've had a great consulting life. I've also had a very adventurous life with many things within. And one of the first things I learned in being in a corporate environment back when I first came out of school, that many of the people that I was surrounded by in the insurance industry were using that to make a living and doing some phenomenal things with their spare time and their special time. So I think one of the things that, if I were to look back and look forward, which I'm right now in that transition point, I just left long-term corporate job just recently, and I'm going in another path right now. I think the one thing, anytime you can take a year to just sort of take a bunch of risks is really fabulous. I had no idea where I was going to land afterwards. After taking a year, I gave up a really wonderful practice, consulting practice, to spend time, because at the time my husband, we were trying to figure out some things because he wasn't feeling well. And out of that just came this amazing year of yoga and all these other things that I just did not have the time to do. And I would have never done had I not had that time. And I look at that now in the transition, and I had a full career in consulting. Then I had a 13-year career in TIAA, in giving back and doing special programming and national advocacy for a wonderful financial services company that, that is really, really cool. And now I'm in that next chapter again. And I think going in and out, as long as you have a passion for it and you figure out what that is for you. And I think the points about what does it mean for you and your family, or whatever your unit of companionship is, whatever that is, the transitions are actually really the most satisfying in the end, even though they might be the most unnerving when you first start at it. And asking questions. I asked everybody that I knew what they thought about, taking a year off, and they told me, honestly, they told me I was crazy doing it at that point in my age. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to jump, because what do you have to lose?
I'm being mindful of the time. We still have several great questions, so we may go a little bit over. If you have to hop off, we are recording this, so we will post this publicly in a few days. So the next question is from Connie.
Okay.
Connie there?
So I'm here because I'm a college advisor. That means I talk to a lot of undergrads, a lot of first gens of immigrant parents, and I really get a strong feeling. First of all, America is a very individualistic society. It's one of the most individualistic cultures in the world. And a lot of my advisees who's come from other cultures have a very, very strong sense of not only duty, but heartfelt wish to take care of their parents. Their parents came maybe and worked very hard. They maybe grew up in very poor neighborhoods. Sometimes they have they feel like their siblings aren't getting the resources they need. And Angela, you mentioned something about this when you said when you were in college and you felt like you needed to be high income. So I've talked to advisees while they're in undergrad and after they've graduated who feel very driven, and it's not just I'm obligated, my parents are doing this to me. They really want to very much relieve their parents of the stress of the low income. So what do you say to yourself when you're arguing in your own mind about, I don't really like, this job is high income, but I don't like it? How do you make that, besides listening to your heart and doing what you really love? Some of what people really love is to make money so they can help their parents. So can you say anything about how you went through any of those struggles? And, is there any consolation? Because sometimes there's nobody to talk to for immigrant kids because they're surrounded by Americans who don't even get it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It is definitely a very common sentiment amongst first-gen immigrant families and communities, and it's one that I understand. I will say that my circumstances were a little bit different in the sense that, like, my family expected that of me, but I didn't feel like a duty or obligation to fully support my parents financially. So the circumstances are a little different. So I do want to point that out. What I will say in regards to the situation that you presented, I think that a couple of things. The first is that I think it's important to get a sense of like what Roni Beth said before, almost like what is enough, right? So what is the number, like that number that you're actually looking at? Like if you want to be supporting your family financially, what does that break down to per month, for example, right? So what would be a good number that would make you feel good, would make you feel like you're supporting your family, right? Otherwise, it's very nebulous and it's like, how do you know when is enough, right? The second thing that I would encourage people to do is as soon as possible, because I feel like financial literacy wasn't a thing when I was in school, but to really think about how you can make your money work for you, right? So yes, it's important, yes, to have a high paying job or to make money, but like, how can you make your money work for you in terms of like, how can you invest your money? And that's a whole separate conversation with financial advisors so that your money is growing in a way that will allow you to reach your financial goals of supporting your family. I think that the third thing that I want to say is that, again, it's about what I mentioned before, like priorities. Like if your main goal is to prioritize your family's financial well-being and to make sure your siblings are supported, if that's what you're committed to, like your commitment will get you through anything because your why is so big, it's so heartfelt that like your job, even if you don't really like it, you'll get through it because your why is so strong, right? So like knowing your why is really important, and it gets you through things. So that's what I want to say. I think in any circumstance, like the why is so important. That's what I will say. The thing is, like, if you really, really, really don't like a job, but it pays well, my feeling from like the people I've seen in those positions, myself personally, it ultimately in the long run, it's not sustainable. There's a certain threshold in terms of like what someone can tolerate. And it's just that the threshold is different for everyone. That's what I'll say.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question now from Ava.
Eva, yeah, hi, thank you.
Eva.
Thanks for Roni and Angela, thank you both so much. Roni, I found your story so inspiring and fantastic. So thank you particularly for all of the very personal stuff that you shared. I mean, I have felt very lucky that I found myself able to really follow my passions at 25 and then to make a career change at 35, which was much more focused on my needs of my family. What I'm grappling with is how do you know at 50 how to take the same kind of leap? I didn't feel any, I feel now looking back, like taking a risk at 25, there's no cost. And making a practical choice at 35, I just feel like it's so interesting to hear each person. And I really appreciated what you shared as well. I for some reason, and I'm feeling this generationally among some of my peers, that somehow at 50, you're like standing at the edge of like what feels like a pool, and you're not sure, like, is this the pool I'm supposed to jump into? Is there some other pool somewhere else? I would have never had that hesitation at 25, and I wonder how you had it. I mean, your children were grown, mine aren't quite yet, so that provides a lot. But I just love that feeling that I get from you that you sort of had a sense and felt able to follow it. So I'd so love your reflections on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would say one thing about that at the sort of the 50. I think 50 is different for a number of reasons, but I think it's another new very beginning. I don't think 50 was the 50 of my mother, for example. So I think that I actually think that there's something really cool about each 10 years of someone's life. And I do think, and then the point was made earlier in the conversation that, you know, you have different needs at different times, but there are always some things that will resonate and that you're good at and you feel heart with and that you care about. And those causes may shift, but there's a lot of things that you can bring along with you. So I say it's a very positive thing to take the time to reflect in sort of 5 to 10 year intervals because it causes you to think a little differently than getting sort of stuck in one thing. So I say, you know, take the risk, because when you don't take the risk, you could be very, very unhappy. And that's actually more depressing and much worse than if you take the risk and have to do it again. The worst thing that happens is you have to fit, the first transition didn't work. That's experimentation.
You also can take small steps. If you're not ready to take a big leap, you can just try something. One of the best stories I know is a woman who makes porcelain figures that are in museums now. She graduated from Hunter College with a degree in accounting and hated it. And what she did was every year she did one less thing she didn't like doing and added one thing that she liked doing most. She made her way to art. And then in making art, she eventually made her way to making porcelain figurines. I just love that story because it wasn't a huge change. It was changing things one piece at a time. And if your kids are still around, it's a perfect time to start. Just add one thing you think you'd like to try and let go of one thing that you really don't want to do anymore. See what happens.
So we have 3 more questions and closing comments. So I think we're going to be going over about 15, 20 minutes. Thank you for staying on with us. The next question is from Cheryl.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Mintz. I graduated in 1987 from the Yale School of Drama. I don't have a question. I believe Lise wanted me to expand on the comment that I put in the chat. Just because there were many questions about how do you network, how do you expand your reach. I'm a theater maker, and the world came crashing down for the theater industry on March 12th, as every single production across the country had to shutter down because of the pandemic. I walked out of my theater. I work at a Tony Award-winning theater in Princeton, New Jersey, and left. If you walk into my office, it looks like the day I walked out on March 12th. Just everything scattered. We were about to open a new production. And just imagine having a career for 35 years and it all came out from under you in one day. So I'm in a fortunate position. I'm financially stable. My husband is retired. I was going to sit out and just wait for the pandemic to end and go back to McCarter Theater, hopefully. But this is dragged on. It's going to drag. I'm not going to be back in a rehearsal hall till 2022. So what do? I volunteered over the summer at a local nonprofit, producing 6 events for them. And that has turned into a business. From one post on social media, I got a phone call from Theater J in Washington, DC to bring my group together and do a gala for them. And that has led to numerous events. We just did an event for People and Stories. Rabbi Silverman, a huge anniversary event for him. We're doing an event for the the National Tennis League in Trenton. Middlesex County, we've done projects off-Broadway, Broadway, Passage Theater. So ranging from small professional theater to off-Broadway to Broadway. And this is all from a single post on Facebook. And we formed a company. It's called Princeton Virtual, princetonvirtual.com. You can read about our story if you go to our Facebook page or to the website. I'm not trying to sell you, but it just happened. So you're looking at a woman who was going to sit out the pandemic and focus on my 16-year-old, focus on my retired husband, and all of a sudden I am an entrepreneur running a business. Never in my career did I think for a moment I would ever be running a business or a theater. I am a production stage manager. I'm a theater maker. I'm a collaborator in larger theater productions. I'm not necessarily someone who wants to be the director or the lead producer. And now I'm making contracts. I have a company, we're dealing with payroll. There are 4 of us, and I'm working with people that I have known for 25 years. So we are all pivoting together. We're all theater makers that are pivoting. And hopefully when live theater is back, our company will pivot back. We'll be able to do live theater, and anything we do virtually will be a side gig. So just expanding on my story. Thank you. You're all very inspiring.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm loving the energy from everyone who's speaking tonight. We have Beata next with a comment, with a question.
Hi, everyone. Roni, Angela, and others who shared, thank you so much. I have a question for Angela. So once you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, maybe you're doing volunteer work and you have a better sense of, kind of where you want to pivot to. I guess I'm trying to figure out what kind of tools I can use in order to kind of find those opportunities. So specifically with your experience, it was really cool to hear about, you leaving your job and then finding those really exciting opportunities within that year. And I'm wondering, was it through job listings, networking? How did you actually find the opportunities that you went and pursued?
Yeah, really good question. So there's so many resources out there. I read books, I scoured the internet for things I was looking for. So they're just like, again, resources about what they call it, like odd jobs, or like non-traditional non-traditional jobs, like outdoor jobs. And then you can search that on the internet using books. So that's what I did. And I think you also just like end up meeting people who are doing different things. So if you've heard of like woofing, like worldwide organic farming, doing that, doing work exchanges. So you just Google, very helpful resource in terms of whatever you're looking for. You just search for it, and there's a lot out there.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, and now we have a question from Masu.
Yes, hi. Angela, I have a question for you as well. How did you decide to become a life purpose and career coach? Just curious.
Yeah, so at my last full-time job, I worked for a nonprofit, and I ran the Career Resource Center there. And part of what I did was career coaching for our constituents. And a lot of people who came to me already had, jobs in mind. And I really wanted to have more opportunity to question, like, why are you interested in this job versus just like reviewing resumes and cover letters. Like, that's super important, but I also wanted to delve a level deeper. And so I enjoyed doing that, and I enjoyed the impact that I was making, and I wanted to take it further. And I had an inkling for a while that I wanted to branch off and do my own thing. So when I decided to do that, the purpose component was really important to me, also because of my own lived experiences of really trying to find my own purpose and like all of the challenges that I grappled with. So I would say it's a combination of my last job and then also just experiences that I've had since graduation.
So, I mean, expanding on that, I think as Yaleys, a lot of times we feel like there has to be like a course or a set way to prepare for a particular profession. And I mean, I have actually, I'm in a previous life, I was a lawyer. I moved into law school career guidance, which was quite an easy transition given that I had been through that whole process. But, I too felt the need I would like to do something more beyond the resume and cover letter piece. But it is finding that sort of training where you feel like, okay, I'm ready to help guide people find what it is that really gives their life purpose. I mean, that's so fascinating to me. And I was curious as to sort of what your background was and how you arrived at that.
Yeah.
And now I think Lise, you want to hop in with a final question?
I do. I was going to be quiet, but you guys, Roni Beth and Angela, are unbelievable. I'm just really inspired by your stories and your honesty and, you know, how you relate to all of us and how you actually help us. So my question for both of you is, looking where you are now and looking back at your younger self, what would you tell your younger self? Thank you.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I've been thinking about this since I got into college, because when I got into college, it was like, oh, I would tell my high school self, like my junior high school self, to stress less. And that's something that's really followed me. So when I landed my first full-time job, I was like, man, if I could go back to senior year Angela in college, I would tell her to stress less. And I feel similarly, my mantra is stress less, live more. I think that we, get so caught up in the day-to-day. There's a lot of pressure. There are a lot of responsibilities, and I would tell my younger self to live more and trust that everything is going to work out the way that it's meant to work out, and to trust in divine timing.
I think I would say be present and have faith. Just take it one day at a time, live each day as fully as you possibly can, and have faith that it's going to work out the way it's supposed to be working out. Just listen to where you're being pointed. And when it's clear you're supposed to go there, just go. I mean, it's Cheryl's story is just such a fabulous example of that. I mean, there it was. It's me sitting down in Stan Castle saying, hello, I'm Stan Castle. And 6 months later, I'm working with them in epidemiology. It just, life does that. It puts what you need in place if you show up. It doesn't if I made the mistake of thinking I could run the show when I was young. We don't run the show. All we can do is figure out how to go along respectfully and make intelligent choices when they're presented to us. But I don't think we're running the show.
I second that. I think the pandemic has proven that we think that we're in control. We like to be in control. But there are forces beyond our control. So it's like, how do you adapt and how do you move forward with everything that's happening? And I think Cheryl's example was such a beautiful one. So thank you for sharing that.
Before we move on to our guest's final comments, we would love to hear from all of you joining us tonight about ideas for future programs. What would you like to see? Please add your ideas in the chat. And if you maybe have a skill or something expertise that you can share with us, please, we want to hear from you. So put your thoughts, comments, contact info in the chat. And we'll move on to final comments of the night from Roni and from Angela.
Angela?
I guess what I want to say is that everything that you want is on the other side of fear. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. So the only way to work through your fear is to face your fear. And I think it's so important. And I think life rewards you every time you do that. So may you all live courageously. Those are my final thoughts.
I love that. And what popped into my head was a patient who was she sailed across the Atlantic in a sailboat. She was crew in a sailboat. And when I said, you're really doing that? And she said, yes, and I'm terrified, but fear is not a good enough reason not to do something. And I just love that. I've held on to that one along with all those other sayings in my head. The one that was on my refrigerator was in Andre Gide. In order to discover new lands, you have to let go of the shore for a very long time. You have to go into the unknown if you want to discover. Now, you don't always have to discover. Everybody's different, but respect your individuality as well as the groups you're a part of. And there are those universal truths, like the what, the why, and the how, and the truth of impermanence. Everything changes. And that's not a good enough reason to not try it, no matter what may happen. So that's sort of my final point. But the Graduate School Association of Arts and Sciences, GSAS, every year has an event, Where Do I Go from Yale? And this year it's April 17th, 9 to 3, 3:30 Eastern Time online. It's an annual spring program that is the exact opposite of this program that we have just brought you. It is panels about the nitty-gritty of different kinds of industries. So if you have a specific industry in mind, you might be interested in signing up for that when it becomes advertised. If you are interested in attracting Yale students and recent alumni to your company, if you have a company, you can be in part of a small group at Where Do I Go from Yale? So in the sign are people to contact if you're in that position, or just write me and I'll send it along to you. And I can't thank you all enough for coming. The biggest prayer I have is please don't let me waste their time. And I hope we have not wasted your time. Thank you very much for giving some of it to us so that we can share some thoughts and ideas that we've discovered and had, and wish you all such success on your journeys and discoveries.
And I have to say, if you want a great book to read, buy this book. I'm going to turn off the back of my screen so you can see it better.
There it is.
There it is. Let's go. Oh, Roni Beth, you have it up? Okay.
I have it up.
This is Roni
That's
Beth.
my book.
It's her book.
my
It's her
book.
story. I loved reading it. I couldn't put it down. If you're stuck in the snow or sitting in the sun, you will love this book. You will love Roni Beth, and you will love David. And after you read the book and you meet them, you will love her and both of them even more, and they'll reread the book. So it's a really inspiring, totally honest, really life story starting at age 52. So I can't.
What's the name of it? I can't see.
It's called Miracle at Midlife.
Thank you.
Roni Beth, can you hold yours up again?
Yep. There it is.
Looks like that. Get it on Amazon anywhere. It's real.
Miracle at Midlife, a transatlantic romance.
It's really a wonderful book. I am here to promote Roni Beth and her book as well.
Thank you so much, Lise.
You're welcome. We're here to promote all first geners at Yale. So all alums and friends and everybody else. Lydia, back to you.
Well, I also want to share an opportunity for everybody who is signed in today. If you're looking to make changes in your life and you'd like to learn more about how coaching can help you accomplish your goals, I encourage you to sign up for a free 30-minute discovery call with Angela. I think we have a screen share with the link, the calendly.com/Angela Choi. You can make an appointment with her to talk about your future, your goals, and whether life coaching is the right role for you. So without further ado, I want to thank everyone for their participation tonight. It's very strange that even through the technology and the screen, I felt so connected to Angela and to Roni and to all of you who were making comments. This was a very, very powerful Zoom, not the usual one that I'm used to. So thank you so much to everyone who participated tonight. So 1stGen Yale is who we are. I encourage all of you to check us out. We have a close private Facebook group. We're on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel with all of these types of recordings that we've been doing since the pandemic began. If you have any questions, you can email us at 1stgenyale@gmail.com. And so with that, I wish everybody a very good night. Stay safe, stay warm, and please connect with us. Until next time.